Thank you, everyone. If you can all take your seats, it's 5:30, so we'll get underway. Before we get going, I'd like to put a few safety announcements. First of all, please note the location of the fire exits. There's one over there and one over there. Can I ask that all mobile phones can be switched off or switched to silent? And please note an audio recording of this meeting is being broadcast live and will afterwards be available on the HDC website. I'd like to remind members of the public that you should remain silent unless you're called upon as an official speaker. And members, when speaking, please remember to switch your microphone on to start and off to finish. For members of the public speaking, you'll use that desk there where that light is on, and you don't need to switch anything on or off. Okay, so item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence, and I have quite a few. So I've got Councillor Potter, Costin, Trott, Allen, Lloyd, Boffey and Greening. I also have Councillor Newton's going to be late. Sorry, she came in. Sorry. Councillor Newton is here.
And I have Councillor Andrew Baldwin, that's the only other one.
Okay, Andrew Baldwin as well.
And John Olsen.
And I guess Councillor Olsen, who's on holiday here. Okay, item 2 is to approve as correct the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of March 2023. Unless anyone has any comments, I will sign them after the meeting. Item 3, do we have any declarations of interest from members? Councillor Burgess.
I'm not sure it is, but yesterday I got a phone call from one of the applicants, as I suspect other people did. Have we explained that they should not be calling us? I just want to check that you've got all the documents we posted through to you. So I just told them they should not be contacting members on a live application at this time.
Yes, thanks. I also got one, and I'm sure many others did, and did more or less the same thing. Yeah. So, okay. So, item 4, Chairman's announcements. I don't have any announcements. So, I'd now like to welcome to the meeting all the speakers and members of the public who've come tonight. I'll be calling you at the appropriate time to come forward and use the microphone on the table there. As I say, it's switched on for you already. You don't have to do anything. And I will tell you how many minutes you have to speak. If you do overrun, I'll ask you to finish your remarks as soon as possible. Item 5 is appeals. That's just for noting. For the benefit of the public, could officers now please introduce themselves?
It's Matthew Porter, Senior Planning Officer, Major Steam.
Jason Hawkes, Principal Planning Officer.
Emma Parks, the Head of Development and Building Control.
Samantha Whitlock, Committee Solicitor.
And Mr. Fawley, Committee Services.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to item 6, which is the first substantive item. It is application for Southwater North, application number DC 220096, Brownstone Park, Worthing Road, Southwater. This comes with a recommendation to approve, subject to the completion of a legal agreement. And I'll now ask the officer to make the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. So before I start, I'd like to refer the councillors to the addendum, which has an additional condition in there. And also I'll make it clear that in the report it refers to a pedestrian crossing. This is slightly misleading on Worthing Road because actually what we've got approval for is a dropped curb, so it's not actually a crossing. However, we have had discussions with Highways to see if there's a potential to improve this, and they have said there is potential for a refuge island, which would improve crossing the road for the elderly residents. And if councillors are minded to, this could be added to as a requirement in the 106 agreement. So here we see the location plan. The site is located to the east side of Worthing Road within the built-up area of Southwater. There's an existing access which cuts across the site, and this allows access for the Park Home site to the rear, and you've also got housing to the north and south of the site. The site was formerly used as a sales and servicing area for brownstone caravans who have now vacated the site. And you see here the hard standing and former sales building, which is now vacant. So this photo shows the existing access road which cuts across the site, and also a large oak tree which is to be retained as part of the proposal, along with the access road. So we see the proposed block plan, proposals for the demolition of the existing building on site, construction of 36 retirement flats and 6 retirement cottages. The existing access roads will be retained and enhanced. A block of flats are proposed to the northern side of the access road, with the cottages located to the southern part. The scheme includes landscaping and a central parking area. Here we see the ground floor of the flats, the proposed flats, mainly one-bedroom flats. As retirement accommodation, this includes communal areas, which are shown in blue here, and this includes owner's lounge and a guest suite. And it should note that each flat has its own access. So this is the elevation of the proposed block of flats, which would be facing Worthing Road. It's 2 stories, and it would be in a horseshoe shape. Includes an internal courtyard, proposed in part cedar boarding, part brick elevations with a red tiled roof. This is considered appropriate in this location. Here we see the other elevations proposed for the flats in the similar materials. Turning to the cottages, so we have the elevations here for the proposed cottages to the southern part of the site. These include cat-side roofs and dormer windows, again a mix of brick and cedar cladding. I should note that these are very similar materials used at the Berkeley site, not too far from here. We see the proposed floor plans and roof plans of the cottages. These will be 2 bedrooms, and each unit would benefit from its own garden area. So this is a visualization, and this is the street scene that you see onto Worthing Road, and it would fill a gap here on a brownfield site and is considered appropriate in terms of the street scene. And here's a visual artist impression, and this shows the oak tree in place. The house is set back. There was an existing ditch there, so they have to be set back from the road slightly. The main considerations are outlined in the reports. This is the block plan. This plan shows the parking proposed. Proposal includes 25 spaces in total, 19 spaces for the flats and 6 spaces for the cottages. As outlined in the report, this is considered low. However, the applicant has submitted considerable evidence of why this is appropriate for this kind of development for retirement living. This includes examples and research of other sites in the country. The Highway Authority have stated they have no reason to doubt the evidence. The proposed level parking is considered acceptable. Purchasers are likely to be an average age of 79 years old and mostly don't own a car. Based on the information submitted, we see no reason or evidence to doubt the parking provision is appropriate, and it's also considered appropriate in all other planning matters as outlined in the report. The application is therefore recommended approval in accordance with recommendation in the 106 and also subject to the additional condition in the addendum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got 2 speakers on this item. The first one, apologies if I pronounce this wrong, but Zaya Thomas. You have 2 minutes. If you could go to the table there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The proposal is for a high-quality scheme with 36 units of retirement living apartments and 6 cottages. The site is the former sales and servicing area for Roundstone Caravans, which is now vacant. The location is well served by public transport, with 2 bus stops immediately adjacent to the site on Worthing Road. Residents will be within walking distance of the shops and services on Fairbank Road to the south. The site is therefore ideally suited for retirement living housing. The proposed design reflects the character of the surrounding area, incorporates local features such as hipped and barn-hipped gables, and local materials such as red brick, clay tiles and weatherboarding. The proposal has been designed to ensure that there are no negative impacts on the amenity of surrounding properties. The officer's report provides a thorough assessment of this matter and concludes that the manner in which the building has been set back and windows duly orientated would result in no significant impact on the amenity of neighbouring properties. The applicant has responded positively to feedback on the matter of highway safety by providing a drop curb crossing to the bus stop on the western side of Worthing Road. An additional 3 parking spaces were provided in response to feedback, with 19 spaces for the apartments, 0.53 spaces per unit, and 6 spaces for the cottages, 1 space per unit. The parking provided for the apartment exceeds the typical demand of a church or retirement living development, which is 0.28 spaces per unit. This is because car ownership is lower than other forms of housing, as residents are typically 81 years old and moved to downsize specifically to be closer to local services. The Highway Authority has reviewed the evidence provided by the applicant and agrees that the proposal will result in fewer vehicle movements than the existing site and that the proposed level of parking is acceptable. The government identifies the delivery of older persons housing as critical, and there is a limited supply of retirement living housing within the borough. This need will continue to increase, with the council's latest housing needs assessment forecasting the population aged 65 and over will increase by 61% by 2039. Planning policy places a significant weight on redeveloping vacant brownfield sites in sustainable locations such as this, and the delivery of 42 residential units will assist in protecting greenfield sites from speculative development. Other benefits derived from the proposal include the provision of a policy-compliant offsite contribution for affordable housing at circa 650k and a SIL contribution of 500k. The proposal has successfully demonstrated water neutrality and is aligned with the objectives to increase tree cover in the borough, increasing the number of trees on site by 40 and by making suitable arrangements for a further 32 trees to be provided elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Second speaker is Justin Tyler, speaking on behalf of Southwater Parish Council, and you have 5 minutes.
Good evening all, Justin Tyler here from Southwater Parish Council, the Executive Officer. The Parish Council supports the use of this site for specialist housing. However, the current proposal conflicts with policies in the Southwater Neighbourhood Plan, which means that we cannot support it and ask that you do not at this current time. The first conflict relates to parking. The proposed development seeks to provide 25 car parking spaces, which is significantly below the 59 spaces required by policy S&P 14.1. The officer stated that the overspill parking could be accommodated on other residential streets nearby. However, there is currently no restrictions to parking on Worthing Road, which may encourage visitors and occupants to park there. Worthing Road is a busy road through the village and should remain free-flowing. Furthermore, where Chesil Avenue has resident-only restrictions, there is concern for the impact of overspill parking into the existing Roundstone Park. One of the main reasons for the inclusion of policy S&P 14 is to address issues around on-road parking, and encouraging on-road parking would conflict with the aspirations of the policy and contribute to anti-social parking behaviours. This would be contrary to policy 33 of the HDPF, which states that the development should incorporate measures to reduce antisocial behaviour in the surrounding area. The Parish Council are concerned about how future residents will access the Horsham bound bus stop. Whilst the Parish Council welcome an extension of the dropped curb and pavement, a larger issue that there is no formal crossing. Worthing Road is particularly dangerous to cross for vulnerable pedestrians, which is why a pelican crossing was installed by the Southwater Junior Academy. The Parish Council firmly believe that a formal crossing should be required from the pavement by the access to the site to the bus stop. Without it, the Parish Council believe that the crossing will be dangerous, particularly for the proposed elderly residents who may need additional time to cross the road. The Council's Environmental Health Officer commented that a noise assessment has not been submitted, which considered the impact of noise from traffic on the Worthing Road. Your officer has included a condition requiring details of ventilation and assessment of noise impact. The District Council's validation requirements are clear. A noise assessment is required for developments likely to be sensitive to noise from nearby sites and uses. Given that a residential use is proposed directly adjacent to the main road, the Parish Council question why the applicant was validated without a noise assessment, and one should certainly have been prepared prior to determination of the application. It is inappropriate to try and address this matter by condition. Without the assessment, it cannot be concluded that the proposal is designed to avoid unacceptable harm to the amenity of occupiers, users of nearby property and land. for example through overlooking or noise, as required by Policy 33 of HDPF. Policy SMP 18.3. SMP 18.3 requires the applicant to provide a minimum of 1 tree per 40 metres squared of floor space created, which should be provided on-site or off-site within the plan area if there is nowhere suitable within the site. And if this is not possible, a commuted sum may be paid in lieu of tree planting. The proposal provides a requirement for 75 trees, of which the applicant proposes 43 trees on site. 32 trees will need to be planted off-site. For on-site planting, we note there is no condition requiring these 43 trees to be planted, just a requirement for hard and soft landscaping details. An additional condition is required, stating that a minimum of 43 trees conforming to British Standard BS 39361, with a minimum girth of 8 to 10 centimetres, must be planted on site to ensure compliance with SMP 18.3. For off-site planting, a legal agreement is required between the applicant, HDC, and the relevant landowner where trees are to be planted. The agreement needs to cover planting, ongoing maintenance, and a requirement that the trees are not removed. Your officer states that the details regarding the trees to be provided off-site and the contribution required would be secured through a legal agreement in the event that permission is granted. This is true, but from what we can see, no information has been provided to confirm where these trees will be planted within the parish. And there is no agreement with the landowner that they can be planted. Whilst we accept that trees can be provided off-site, at this time there is no evidence that they have an agreed location to plant the remaining 32 trees. As a result, it cannot be confirmed the proposal complies with policy SMP 18.3. Whilst Southwater Parish Council supports the provision of specialist housing within the village, it cannot support the current proposal due to the current policy conflicts with the neighbourhood plan and the HDPF. As a result, Southwater Parish Council object to the current proposal. However, we do believe that these matters can be addressed, and we ask that members defer making a decision on this application to enable the applicant additional time to overcome the issues we raise.
Thank you very much. Would officers like to come back on any of the issues raised so far?
Yes, just clarify, a noise assessment was submitted, and that was assessed by the environmental health officer, and he did raise a few concerns, so that's why we've got the condition requiring further details to be submitted. But in principle, you'd say that housing along here is acceptable. It's set back from the road, so the principle of development here, set back from the road is appropriate, given that you've got many examples of housing and accommodation up on this road. So that's why we've done a condition, because we feel it can be addressed through those measures.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to the local member, which is Councillor Vickers.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to the officers for your very full report. I don't think anybody will dispute that this is a brownfield site, therefore the principle of development is entirely acceptable here, and retirement housing adjacent to the caravan park that's behind is entirely appropriate. I think you will have heard that the main concerns for this site is the amount of parking spaces that are being provided. I'm somewhat surprised to understand that the average age of people who are going to live here is going to be 79 and therefore they won't need a car. I assumed retirement living meant anybody who had retired over the age of about 60, and certainly most 60 and 70-year-olds do still drive. So there is a real concern about whether there's enough car parking spaces on this site. I'm delighted to hear that West Sussex County Council now say they can put a refuge on the Worthing Road so that residents can safely cross to the bus stop. We must be encouraging people to use the buses. And I know the residents already on that site have been requesting a safe crossing there for many years. So thank you to officers for speaking to West Sussex and getting them to agree that that is a possibility. That is really helpful. I'll be very interested to hear what other members have to say, and I'd like to come back after that, Chairman. Thank you. And I would also like to say that Councillor Billy Greening, who can't be here this evening, shares my concerns about the parking that's available and about a safe crossing, but he won't know that a refuge has been accepted by West Sussex. So I'll be interested to hear others' views. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who else would like to speak? Councillor Stannard?
Just to reinforce the the fact that there are few anomalies here, the idea of building on a brownfield site is good. We want to do that. The parking is a problem. My parents and my wife's parents are all 79 and all drive. So the idea that 79-year-olds don't drive is a myth. And so that's just nonsense. And we just need to be very mindful of being fobbed off by something like that. Because one presumes that 66-year-olds could move in, and they definitely will drive. There is a concern also that the street is a busy street, and if we have people parking along that street to visit, there are no visitor parking spaces at all. So therefore, any visitor will have to park away. So the 79-year-old visiting another 79-year-old will have to park some distance away to walk to the site, which does potentially lead to problems, because where they're going to park, and if they park on a Worthing Road, that's a very busy road. It does surprise me that West Sussex think that Pelican Crossing isn't appropriate, and it also surprises me that they don't think it's appropriate to put lines on the road to prevent that happening. So I do share some of the parish council's concerns. We do need to develop this site, but I'm not convinced that at the moment there's enough parking to prevent a problem in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Officers like to respond?
Thank you, Chairman. Just with regards to the parking, I think that the age of 79 is because the applicants have said their average age of their occupants on their other properties is 79 years old. Officers recognise, obviously, the limit here is lower than in age, and we're not saying anybody age 79 doesn't have a car, but I think we have to recognise that the older population have less of a car ownership, so the likely need for parking is lower. We have to recognise that the current parking standards for open market housing and are not for retirement housing. There is no parking standard that we have specific for retirement housing. So we have to recognise it's a slightly different model of housing. And so therefore, in principle, less parking may be acceptable. Now, you will recognise from the report, officers did push back on the level of parking. And as a result of that, we did have significant evidence submitted to us, including other appeal decisions, which have recognised that a much lower level of parking was acceptable for a retirement housing type. And obviously in this instance, that is supported by West Sussex County Council, who have raised no objection to the scheme. Thank you.
Councillor Stannard?
Just notwithstanding, the lack of visitor parking strikes me as peculiar, because presumably visitors will visit and need to park. And carers. I mean, you might have people there who have carers 3-4 times a day. A doctor, these are not. So it's not that the principle. I think the idea of the development is fine, but I think that we could be gently walking towards a problem in the future if we don't address the fact that people need to park there to visit, doctors need to visit, carers need to visit. And 79-year-olds do drive.
Thank you. Councillor Newton.
Yes, Chairman. Oh, can you hear me? Can I just query with the officer? Did I hear correctly that 42 trees were being taken down to be replaced by 3?
No, it was the other way around.
3 trees were being taken down, and 42 were being.
Yes, as part of the landscaping scheme. Yes.
Okay, fine. All right. Yes. Thank you. Yes, I thought that was a bit excessive. Yeah.
And then the additional trees required by the South Water Parish policy going to be secured through a Section 106 agreement.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Karen Burgess.
Thank you. I'm intrigued how they come to the conclusion that elderly people don't drive. I would have thought elderly people would require cars more so than able-bodied people. Depends also, of course, what the bus service is like in that particular area. If they have the misfortune to live where I live, they'd find the bus service is totally inadequate. Also, I'd like to know too, as the proportion of people are supposedly going to be elderly living in this complex, What proportion have you got of disabled parking bays? Because obviously you're assuming that quite a few of these elderly people will have mobility problems. And as has been pointed out, there will be extra spaces needed for carers and for doctors. But proportionally, most of these probably will be disabled parking bays. Can the officers confirm how many there are, please?
They're showing one, the disabled space on the plan, yes. Yeah. But you have to take into account, as Emma said, we have pushed back this, and when you first see this, it doesn't appear right. But as Emma says, we don't have standards for retirement living under the guidance, and they've submitted. Because of our pushback, they've submitted all this evidence of their other sites where this level of parking is acceptable, and we've no reason to doubt that. And they've also submitted appeal decisions where they've come across similar schemes where they've lost on parking and taken it to appeal in one of those cases. So it is quite overwhelming evidence, I'm afraid. So we don't have any evidence to the contrary to say that this isn't appropriate. So
I'm sorry, I'd like to come back on that point. I don't think that's an adequate answer. I think we really need to look at this. If you're saying it's a designated place for elderly people, there are bound to be more than one person on the whole patch who's disabled. I think we need to look at this again and perhaps review it, because I think one parking space for disabled people is simply not enough.
Okay, I'll go to Councillor Minto.
Oh, do apologise. Thank you, Chair. Look, I totally agree with what's been said before, and I just want to maybe throw in an extra dimension as well, because life expectancy is increasing over time. So yes, the property now, even though it's low, we generally feel is insufficient. I assume it's being built to stand the test of time, and obviously I think as people age and are healthier as they get older, they will all be driving. So I totally concur. I think we are going to potentially give ourselves a bit of a parking headache here.
I think we just have to recognise it is in a sustainable location. It is within a built-up area boundary. You have got a bus stop the other side of the road. Officers advise there is the possibility, if members consider it reasonable and necessary, to secure a refuge island in the road. So I think we have to recognise the location it is and the expectation that not everybody will drive and people will use public transport. And if they're able to drive, they're probably able to walk down to the shops as well. So I think we have to recognise that perspective. It is in a sustainable location, and therefore again it's another reason why perhaps you wouldn't have a significant level of parking on the site. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you very much. I read the report with interest, and I note that the average age of people who enter this particular type of housing is 79, and the average age of people who living there is in their late 80s. So I do understand that there's been significant evidence provided for similar sites having very low levels of car use. But it does seem to me that the applicant is trying to argue things both ways here. On the one hand, they're arguing that there will be very few cars because the residents are likely to be so old or so disabled that they're unable to drive and will be relying on other people to transport them. And on the other hand, they're talking about it being a short walk to the shops and being okay to cross the busy Worthing Road to the bus stop. Now, this is an excellent place as regards use of public transport. It's a really good site for that, and there's a bus stop right opposite. But I don't think that it's consistent to argue that these people have sufficient eyesight, mobility and cognition and all the rest of it, that they can cross the Worthing Road without a controlled crossing, and that they are sufficiently incapacitated that they won't be using a car. So I really welcome West Sussex's acceptance that there is a possibility of a refuge on the road, but I am wanting to query whether we can actually ask for the crossing to be reviewed to include looking at a controlled crossing, a pelican crossing or puffin or whatever, or similar, because if you're not providing the car parking space that you would normally provide in a development of this size, you need to provide for the alternative mobility needs, and that, in my view, would be a controlled crossing. So, secondly, it's been mentioned that people are very unlikely to cycle, and I agree that few people are likely to cycle, although this is a self-sustaining objection, sort of situation if you don't provide for it. But people will be visited by friends, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and it's all very well saying that there's a Downs link nearby and lots of long rides, and you can promote cycling, which is what the developer's documentation says, but you actually need to link to the site so that your grandchild or your chiropodist can turn up on their bike and can get to you. And that is one of the ways where you don't need so much car parking. So the officers mentioned adding the conditions about the crossing. I'd like to suggest that the conditions should include looking at the possibility of a controlled crossing and taking further into consideration improving, actively promoting alternative transport access to the site in accordance with Southwater Neighbourhood Plan 4.1.
Thank you. Would officers like to respond?
Yes, in terms of the pedestrian crossing, we have queried this with highways, and their initial view is that it's not feasible to have a crossing here. It's for highway safety reasons, but we can go back and clarify that again if deemed unnecessary. And for cycle parking, there is a condition requiring details of cycle parking, and there's also condition requiring details of a travel plan. And so yeah, those two things will be covered for the back conditions.
Thank you. Councillor Kitchen.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Basically, I like this, and when I first read it, I thought that's a brilliant idea on that derelict site. But I have to support all those people who are concerned about car parking. And when I heard, I think Councillor Stannard saying that there are no guest parkings at all, I just find that quite unbelievable. Representing, as I do, the new build area of Kilnwood Vale, the problems that they have up there with lack of parking spaces, cars are parked on the pavement all over the roads, the buses can't move through, and frankly, it's absolute chaos. So unless we can sort something out about the parking here, I honestly can't support it, although I like the general idea of what's being proposed.
Thank you. Councillor Bevis.
Thank you, Chairman. My mother lived in a scheme roughly this sort of size, and I think the residents had probably 6 cars between them. But the difference there was that was a mature scheme, so residents had entered the scheme with a car and then stopped using it over a period of time. The problem I see with this is that everyone will be going to the scheme at the same time, so there'll be a lot more users of cars than there would in a much more mature scheme. So I think, you know, it's fallacious really to compare this scheme to a mature scheme, which is what the developers have done, because in a mature scheme, people would have made a decision that they don't need a car. They'd have got used to what the facilities are in the area and found they don't need a car. Whereas this scheme, people will be coming here from elsewhere. They won't understand what's available to them. They will hang on to their car for grim death until they can see that they actually don't need it.
Thank you. Councillor Lindsay.
Yeah, I just wanted to support what everyone said. I do think in that particular scheme, I think you would need a car, because the main shopping area in Southwater is at least half a mile away. And as you get older, as I'm getting, it becomes much more difficult probably to walk the half mile or so down to the main shopping area in Southwater. So I support what everyone says about car parking.
Thank you. I think we'll go back to the local member now, Councillor Vickers.
Thank you, Chairman. Listening to what people have said, it's quite clear that the parking is a significant issue. Sorry, was there somebody else wanting to speak first?
There was, I didn't see that.
Okay, fine.
Councillor Brown.
I was only going to say, Chairman, I concur mainly with what people have said about the car parking, because it is a fair clip for somebody who's old and perhaps infirm to walk down to Lintott Square from there. But more importantly, when they've been to Lintott Square, how are they going to lug all that shopping home? They need a car, don't they? And, you know, just walking across the road to the bus stop is perhaps not acceptable. And then who's to say there won't be married couples coming in there with car each? I know lots of people in their late 70s, 80s who've got a car each. So that doubles it, doesn't it? So I think the parking is inadequate. I mean, it's only a question of knocking out a few and putting some more spaces in. I can't see what the problem is.
Councillor Vickers, sorry, if you go back to
Yes, I think it's fairly clear that what has been said is there's a concern about the amount of car parking available. I want to ask the officers whether there is any scope to improve on that, which is being provided. I know that you had concerns about the amount of car parking. The evidence that's been provided shows that the amount of use is less than what everybody here seems to think. I share those concerns. I think it's sad because I think it's a really good site for retirement dwelling. I think it's adjacent to an existing park homes. It is a good location, and I am pleased to hear about the refuge. I think that is really important. Is it worth deferring the decision this evening to have further consultation about the car parking? The parish council have serious concerns about people parking on the Worthing Road, as I do. Some will park half on the pavement because they do, if they need to nip in there to drop something off. The lack of visitor parking worries me. I just wondered if there is any scope for further negotiation. Would it be worth deferring a decision?
I think the difficulty is there has already been negotiation with officers and the applicants, and there has been a small increase in parking following that. I think the difficulty we now have is you can't provide additional parking without fundamentally changing the scheme. So as you can see the site plan before you, I cannot see any way where you could easily add parking without changing the development itself. And obviously if you're changing the development itself, fundamentally that's a fresh proposal. So I think if members are significantly concerned about parking, I think we should determine the application before us, because I cannot see how we can add additional parking but still have the same scheme that we have.
I'd be more confident about approving the application if West Sussex were prepared to put yellow lines along the Worthing Road adjacent to this site. However, you're saying they will not consider that. Is that worth going back to them to see whether they can be persuaded?
See, there's been further comments today from Councillor Fletcher and yourself, Councillor Vickers, regarding a signalised crossing and double yellow lines. Obviously, my colleague has had initial conversations with County who have said neither of which are necessary. It's unclear whether they're completely unfeasible. So that is an option where we can go back to County for that reason. But as I said, I think we would find it very difficult to increase parking. We certainly asked, but you can see the floor plan there. I think we'd find it difficult to find additional parking spaces on that scheme, but certainly we could go back to County on those other 2 points. Thank you.
Chairman, on that basis, could we ask for a deferral for this decision to be made this evening on the basis we need to go back to County, please?
Yes, if we could just clarify the grounds. You're talking parking and...
Yeah, I think we need more disabled parking space, maybe one more disabled parking space and a visitor parking space. And people buying those flats will know what the availability of parking is when they purchase those properties. So the likelihood of buying a one-bedroom flat and wanting to park 2 cars, I think, is extremely unlikely. On that basis, try and get West Sussex County Council to review, I understand why they won't put a Pelican crossing in, but try to encourage them to do a crossing there and to put yellow lines to prevent people parking on the Worthing Road. On that basis, I think the plan overall could be acceptable. So I'm asking for a deferral to go back to county, please.
And do you have a seconder for that?
Sorry, can we just?
Sorry.
I'm asking for a deferral to go back to county to see whether they can be persuaded to put yellow lines on the Worthing Road adjacent to this site. A Pelican crossing would be ideal, but if they can't be persuaded, a refuge is acceptable in principle, in my opinion. But also to ask the applicant to increase the number of disabled parking spaces and provide at least one visitor parking space. So on that basis, please, could I ask for a deferral? Thank you.
Okay. And do we have a seconder for that?
We do, but I would like to say and add the criteria that we must have a crossing, because elderly people cannot do a sprint across a busy road. They need a crossing. Children need a crossing. The traffic travels extremely quickly down that road, and I think that's looking at a potential accident if you do not have a crossing.
That's a material change. Councillor Vickers, I go back to you, or else we need a different seconder.
Chairman, my personal view is the road is quite narrow there and a refuge is acceptable. So I am quite, a Pelican crossing would be ideal, but if there's a really strong safety reason why county can't provide one, I would prefer them to provide one if it's at all possible. But
just go back to the officer.
Councillors, could I just suggest we explore both options as part of any deferral, and then we can come back with further details following discussions with the county and the applicant.
Okay, on that basis, then I think your seconding is acceptable. So we will take that to the vote. So we are it's an alternative motion to defer in order to go back to highways to discuss. Yeah. Parking. Okay, great. So all those in favour of deferral, please raise their hands.
That's 17.
All those against? And any abstentions?
17 in favour, 1 abstention, so the motion to defer is carried.
Okay. Right, we'll move on to item 7 on the agenda, which is DC 220302. It's the Sony DADC UK Limited, Southwater Business Park, Worthing Road, Southwater. This comes with an officer recommendation to approve. If we can go to the officer for their presentation, please.
Hi, good evening, members. This is a report update on this item that sets out amendments to conditions in response to discussions with the change in the applicant that's occurred since publication of the committee report. I'll assume that everyone's familiar with the addendum and the conditions that are listed there. In addition to that, there is also a proposal to remove condition 35 on the committee report, as this is now redundant because we have a tailored control to the fixed plant in the list of amended conditions. So as the slide shows, the site is in the centre of Southwater and the character of the area is mixed. You've got residential and Lintott Square to the north and Southwards Country Park to the south, and the Downs link runs parallel to the northeast boundary. The proposal is to redevelop a vacant site for 7 employment units. The proposed planning uses are light industrial, general industrial, storage and distribution. No end users are identified, and the applicant seeks unfettered 24/7 operation. On the slide, you can see existing and proposed site plans and elevations. The new units are arranged parallel to the northeast boundary with service into the south, and the scheme has 119 car parking spaces. In your officer's view, the proposal conforms to local plan policy in terms of site designation, and its reduced floor space means that it's not considered overdevelopment. So there's various mitigations and controls that are detailed out in the committee report that would avoid significant adverse harm, and that includes onto the amenities of adjacent residents. Several of the properties are shown on the slide. The list of conditions allow for unfettered operations inside the unit, whilst managing outdoor activity, including estate traffic and noise generation, which has potential for disturbance. So your officer's main concern is to deal with the delivery and dispatch of traffic, and that issue's been carefully considered, acknowledging the important fact that the existing site benefits from unfettered 24/7 use. So your officers judge that the suite of conditions, both in the committee report and updated in the addendum, are to be appropriate, and they are a balance successfully between the applicant's request for flexibility while safeguarding amenity, and also whilst being informed by the environmental health officer's advice. So the highway impacts of the travel demand generated by proposals been assessed by the Highway Authority. The traffic modelling results, with 120 more vehicular trips daily, is not disputed by the Highway Authority. And the Highway Authority is satisfied that the existing highway network has the capacity to accommodate these additional trips, and that the access would operate safely. And that's without the need for a traffic regulation order or the upgrade of the Mill Straight roundabout as identified and requested by the parish. So on the evidence submitted, and subject to the traffic management controls that are secured by the conditions, your planning officers do not disagree with the conclusions of the Highway Authority. So in conclusion, and then subject again to those list of appropriate controls and mitigations through those conditions, and in recognition that there's no adverse impact or harm in regard to all other material planning considerations, as explained and detailed in the committee report, it's recommended the application be approved.
Thank you very much. We have 2 speakers on this item. Can I first call Ashley Collins? You have 2 minutes. Do we have an Ashley Collins? We don't seem to. Okay. We will move on to Justin Tyler speaking on behalf of Southwater Parish Council again, and you have 5 minutes. Can you, someone turn the light off? If you could switch the button, that's it.
Good evening all again. The site is in the centre of Southwater and in very close proximity to many houses, the nearest of which is a mere 25 metres away. The access is on the Worthing Road, the busy main route through the village, which serves most of our community. This brings into question the suitability of the site for the outlined purposes of a logistics centre. Other uses would have less impact to the amenity of occupiers of nearby property and land as required by policy 33 of HDPF. The applicant has submitted a transport statement which acknowledges that the existing site is not at full capacity, given that some of the buildings are not currently used. Trip generation for the lawful use has been calculated using TRICS and compared against the trip generation from the proposed development, stating that there will be a net decrease in vehicle trips during AM and PM peak hours and a total increase in daily vehicle trips by 120. It must be recognised that the population of the village has grown since the existing units became vacant in 2018, meaning that the amount of traffic on Worthing Road has increased since the site was last fully operational. For the application site itself, the existing number of vehicle movements is significantly lower than when it was operating at full capacity. Therefore, whilst an assessment of the previous use is helpful, the results do not truly or accurately reflect the impact that the resumed and increased vehicle movements onto Worthing Road will have. When acknowledging the fact that the existing site is disused, there will be 556 daily trips, which will substantially increase vehicle movements onto Worthing Road. This will have a significant impact on Worthing Road and the highways network, particularly when considering that there's been an increase in traffic from 2018 due to the considerable housing development ongoing and completed, and the associated increased population. This continues with two other residential developments being considered at this meeting. One of the parish council's main concerns is that during peak times, there is often queuing traffic along Worthing Road. A significant increase in vehicle movements into the business park will create even further congestion on Worthing Road through the village, including from larger goods vehicles. The proposal conflicts with paragraph 111 of the MPPF, which states that development should be refused if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network would be severe. The second issue regarding noise impacts into unsociable hours, noise concerns were raised regarding nighttime vehicle movements into and out of the site. Environmental health officers recommend that movement be restricted to between 7 AM and 8 PM Monday to Friday, 7 AM to 6 PM Saturdays, and not at all on Sundays, bank holidays, or public holidays. However, the planning officer has changed this to be between 7 AM and 10 PM Monday to Saturday, and 9 AM to 6 PM on Sundays, bank holidays, and public holidays. The parish council strongly object to 10 PM as an appropriate time for deliveries to cease during the week and Saturdays, particularly as many residents close to the site will undoubtedly hear every vehicle movement into and out of the site, potentially by heavy goods vehicles, late into the evening when loud noises produced from vehicles would disrupt residents significantly. We also disagree that 9 AM to 6 PM on Sundays, bank holidays, or public holidays is appropriate, given that these days are when residents are most likely to stay at home and relaxing. The vast majority of their days will be interrupted and spoilt by the noise associated with the movement of heavy goods vehicles. As it stands, this proposal will not avoid unacceptable harm to the amenity of occupiers, users of nearby properties and land, for example, through overlooking and noise, as required by policy 33 of the HDPF. If members are minded to grant planning permission, we ask that you adhere to the view of the environmental health officer and restrict movements to between 7 AM and 8 PM Monday to Friday, 7 AM to 6 PM Saturdays, and not at all on Sundays, bank holidays, or public holidays. Due to the above issues, but before I do go on any further, may I also add that the roundabout at Mill Strait, as mentioned by your officer, is actually currently breaking up. It's broken up numerous occasions. We've reported to the county council, so I'm surprised it hasn't been raised or flagged as an issue by county and highways. So due to the above issues, the proposal conflicts with the Southwood Neighbourhood Plan, which states that for the two business parks, all proposals should be carefully scrutinised to ensure that the impacts of growth in these locations do not have unacceptable impacts on the rest of the community. There are many development proposals in the locality, either subject to planning applications, appeals, or approved. We urge the committee to consider both the combination and cumulative effects of these on Southwood. You may see some maps in front of you which demonstrate this. While Southwood Parish Council support the principle of bringing the site back into use to create jobs and boost the local economy, it must not be done at the expense of residential amenity. And as a result, Southwood Parish Council strongly object to this proposed development.
Thank you very much. Would officers like to come back at anything at this point, or?
I can do. It might be worth hearing what the other members feel about the scheme first.
That's fine, yeah. Okay, I'll go to the local members. Who would like to go first? Councillor Stannard.
The principle of developing the site to create local jobs is good, and no one really objects to that, I don't think. It's important that we encourage local businesses to come to Southwater, so there are jobs for people in Southwater, so they hopefully can walk to work as well as drive. I have significant concerns about the 24-hour operation. I think that's a nonsense. The proximity of residential homes is very different to when it operated in the past, when there was a single company. And there has been much more development in Southwater, and there will be continuing development in Southwater going forward. A note on 6.4.6, the Council's Environmental Health Officer has formally objected to unrestricted 24-hour use as a degree of control necessary to protect the amenities of nearby residents, as it would not be enforceable as a planning condition. Nighttime noise from increased traffic movements into the entrance of Worthing Road will be readily audible to residents. There will be a harmful impact, and as a result, the proposal conflicts with HPDF policies 24 and 33. And I note that the Environmental Health Officer recommend movements be restricted to the hours which are not dissimilar to those mentioned by the parish. I agree that it should not be open on Sunday, it should not be open on bank holidays or public holidays, and it should have restricted access to 7 till 8 Monday to Friday and 7 till 6 on Saturday. That seems to me not unreasonable. I appreciate there are people who might say we won't therefore be let, but meh, that's not important. So far as we're concerned, we need to protect residents who live there, not worry about businesses who are not there. We have to think about the impact on the people who are permanently there, not people who go to work there. And I think we need to therefore consider the residents who are there and the impact on the residents who are there. So on the basis of that, my general view at the moment is that the 24-hour operation is unacceptable, and we should listen to the Council's Environmental Health Officer and follow a restricted use, but I'm happy to be persuaded otherwise.
Thank you. The officers will just come back on that.
Councillor Stannard, if I could just come back on one part and say, completely recognise clearly we need to consider the impact on neighbouring occupiers. We do, though, also need to consider the impact on businesses and the economic benefit of the scheme. And clearly there aren't many businesses that work 9 to 5 now, and we have to recognise that modern businesses want flexible working, and with that comes with different hours than perhaps we've historically considered to be acceptable. So it is a consideration about attracting future occupiers to the buildings and the economic benefits that brings the district. So clearly that needs to be balanced along with the impact on the residents. But just to be clear, they are both material planning considerations. Thank you.
I accept that, which is why 7 till 8 is not 9 to 5.
Thank you. Councillor Lindsay.
I support everything that Ian has just said.
Thank you. That's the shortest speech of the night. More of those, please. Councillor Vickers.
Yes, Chairman, I well remember when that building was previously occupied, and that was quite some time ago when it closed down. So it's been very quiet there ever since. I welcome the opportunity to get more jobs back into Southwater so people can work locally. However, Lintott Square is where it is because we moved the industrial estate out of the centre of the village up to Oakhurst Business Park at the northern end of the village because of the impact it was having on the community for big lorries coming in and out to the industrial estate. I accept that this is already an employment site and should be retained because we need employment sites and it's part of our planning policies. However, 24-hour operation on local residents, in my personal opinion, is totally unacceptable. And whilst I support flexible working and those local jobs, I agree with my colleagues that I think the suggested hours that you just mentioned are acceptable. So subject to that, I would accept the officer's recommendation to approve, but I would like to see the unfettered 24-hour use not agreed to. And my colleague, Councillor Billy Greening, shares the same view. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Raby.
I totally agree with what Councillor Stannard's saying. I live next to a site almost identical to this that my grandparents converted the old farm buildings, and it becomes a ghost town. It's very successful. All the companies there are growing and have done very well since it was converted. And it's a ghost town on Saturdays. There's no one there on Sundays, and everyone leaves at 5 o'clock. Lots of companies are perfectly capable of running successfully in a reduced time. And I think it wouldn't be difficult to find tenants and employers that would make use of it. And those are relatively long days for a lot of companies. I think in this location, there's no need for that length of time. I don't think it would increase that much employment. There's a lot of desire for rental space. So I totally agree with the suggested restrictions that Councillor Stannard proposed.
Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you. It'd be great to get these units back into use and have more employment and economic activity locally in the village. So that's going to be wonderful if that happens. I did have a minor point in terms of the site layout. If you look at the layout design, you can see that it's got a line of loading bays going up to the doors of each of the units. And it's been carefully designed so that if you go into the site by car, you can drive through the site to a parking space and then step onto the pavement and go into your unit. However, if you walk to the site or cycle to the site, units 2 and 3 can only be accessed by walking in the path of potentially reversing HGV vehicles. So I'd like to suggest that we condition any approval to include safe pedestrian access and cycle parking for units 2 and 3. So it needs to have a safe pedestrian access across the site to units 2 and 3 and cycle parking once you get there.
Would officers like to respond to that?
Yes, that's fine. There's a condition 21, which could be amended as Councillor Fletcher's suggestion. I don't know if it's the opportunity to come back on noise issues more generally, or do you want everyone? So officers don't support the 24/7 operation, and I thank members for supporting that position. The reason why there's a difference between what environmental health is suggesting and us as planning officers is that we as planning officers need to balance out all the considerations, and there is an argument to make that there is an opportunity to be a little bit more flexible than the environmental health restrictions here, because a lot of B8 operators do generally want an opportunity for a delivery on a Sunday for preparation the following week. The reason why we're looking at it a little bit more flexibility is because of the history of the site and the need to recognise that each site has a particular circumstance that we need to account for. And in this particular case, because it's the existing use historically is unfettered, there could be an operator to come in at any time and occupy the existing building and operate 24/7 without any controls whatsoever. And it would be up to environmental health then to enforce it under different legislation. So one unique circumstance here is where my cursor is. You've got a very open car parking area. Again, there's no controls that it shall be used for car parking, so you could get an operator come in who will use that for open storage. A timber merchant is a different use, not been applied for, but comparable impacts in terms of outdoor storage and vehicular movements could occur there, and we would have no control. Whereas what we have tried to balance in our suggested hours is bringing in the control, which wouldn't exist otherwise, to enable the development to proceed, because we've had a very strong position and assertion by the applicant that the hours are fundamental to the application progressing, and there has already been a loss of one applicant, Frontier Estates Limited, who vacated the project because of the restrictions that we're putting on. So there's a very evidential need there to be a little bit more flexible, but I recognise that there's a difference between the environmental health and the planning officer's hours of operation. So the option is there, I think, to look at each on its own case.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Burgess.
Thank you. This is not the first time I've heard this argument about the economic use of these so far unsold units. It's such that we need 24 hours. There's another one, and they all happen in Southwater as it happens, or the last time it did. There are people who live there. Yes, we do know. In fact, you may wish to hear that councillors are being blamed for the lack of accommodation for commercial uses being sold. And I can't remember the name of the site, but it's the last time in Southwood. Yeah. We are here to maintain a balance. I'm really sorry, but if you have access 24 hours a day, people will be turning up in large lorries, small lorries, noisy lorries at any time between 6 o'clock at night and 8 o'clock the next morning. If you have a 24-hour access, there's nothing you can do about it except please stop it, and of course a commercial unit won't. So with the amendments that Ian Stanhard has put forward, and I think are probably going to be agreed by most people, I think we need to control the hours of use. And I'm really sorry if they can't sell these units. Other units will come along who can obey these rules. And the fact you can't sell them is not a major thing in my mind. The people who live there, the protection of them, the quietness is really very important. Thanks.
So, sorry about that. So the times that you see on the screen, that's the suggested condition for deliveries, dispatch and arrival. So if your request is for the actual operation hours, so that's inside the building, to be restricted similarly, then there would have to be a new separate condition imposed. Because at the moment, we feel that, and environmental health feel that internal working, because of the physical fabric of the new buildings and the fact that there's measures to address through acoustic screens, that there isn't a need to restrict operational hours overall. It's only the dispatch and deliveries which we are restricting. So there would have to be a new condition, additional condition imposed.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to the local members in a moment. Councillor Vickers, you have spoken earlier. Is there something significant? Oh, okay. Is there someone else?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, the officer spoke just now about using the existing site as is for other purposes. Well, that site's been empty for a very long time, so I think that's a complete red herring. We're looking at this particular application now, and I don't think we should consider how the site could be used other than that, because it clearly hasn't been at all suitable for anyone for a long time. So I'm just a bit surprised that argument has been put forward. I think we need to look at this application and determine what hours we are looking for to put as conditions on that. Thank you.
Clearly, completely appreciate Councillor Bevis. It has been vacant for a period of time, but the fact that the existing site has an unfettered use, so there are no restrictions of hour operations, is a material planning consideration. We also have to recognise over the past few years we've had a slightly different market than perhaps we've had historically, and that there are reasons why companies haven't moved. But I recognise we're dealing with the current proposal, but that the current working hours of the site is a material planning consideration we need to bear in mind in our decision making. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we go back to local members?
For the avoidance of doubt, my objection is to 24-hour dispatch and delivery. If people wish to work on their computer at 7 o'clock at night, well, that's their business and they're not making a lot of noise. So I would support, in principle, the application with both the environmental health hours and also my colleague, Councillor Fletcher's condition too. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm just wondering whether that constitutes a motion. Yes, Councillor Fisher.
But before we move on to any motions, could I ask a question of the officers? Because it looks like we're considering potentially reviewing the hours of operation here. And if you look at the difference between the planning recommendation and the EHO recommendation, the difference is between 6 or 8 at night and 10 Monday to Saturday, and between none and something on Sunday. And I'm wondering whether, if we're reviewing the hours of operation, whether it might make the difference if a Sunday, there was some limited Sunday delivery available, because as the officer said, that is often quite crucial for a business to have the delivery the day before the working day tomorrow. So I'd really like officers' comment on, if we were to review those hours, whether they have some advice on what would be a sensible change to make.
I think it's open to members to consider the hours acceptable as printed, to consider environmental health recommendation as acceptable as Councillor Stannard has said, or an alternative, and that alternative could be with some limited opening on Sunday as well. I think it's quite tricky to say what would be acceptable. Obviously, normal working hours are kind of 10 to 4, but it would be open to members to consider that suggestion. Thank you.
I think that it would be best to stick with the environmental health hours, not least because it also seems to comply with the parish council's view as well. So, far for it, I think that's reasonable. I completely accept what you're saying, but for the time being, I would advocate a motion to accept with the environmental health hours being adhered to for delivery and dispatch and policed appropriately, and for the conditions Councillor Fletcher recommended regarding access to the other units to be considered in the development phase. Thank you.
Okay, let's just get that down as in a written form. So it's to.
So basically, I mean, I'm not an expert at this, but to accept the proposal with the environmental health hours of 7 till 8 Monday to Friday, 7 till 6 Saturday, no operation Sunday, bank holiday, public holiday. This does not restrict people working in the building, but it restricts access for the delivery and dispatches, to be clear, and that the proposal also includes the condition suggested by Councillor Fletcher
Units
of
2 and
a
3.
units 2 and 3 to have
Safe
better access for
Safe
pedestrians. I
and
can't
safe.
remember.
Yes.
Councillor Stannard, my understanding that therefore involves an amendment to condition 33, which relates to the hours of operation. And with regard to the, sorry?
Yeah.
Hours of delivery, sorry. And then the condition 21 to be amended to account for the safe pedestrian and cycle parking. So it's an amendment to condition 33 and amendment to condition 21. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, is it possible to ask West Sussex to review the roundabout, please? It doesn't have to be a condition, but it really does need looking at.
I think it's difficult to do that within the scope of this application, given the comments we've already got from county. Obviously, an informative would normally be directed towards the applicant, but we can certainly add it as an informative if members wish. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we've got an alternative motion to accept, to approve, basically going to the hours as recommended by Environmental Health.
Amendment of condition 30.
If you want to read it out.
Subject to the amendment of condition 33 relating to the hours of delivery to reflect those advised by Environmental Health, and amendment to condition 21 regarding pedestrian access in units 2 and 3. And cycle access.
Okay. And an informative regarding the roundabout. I think we've got it all there. Okay, so I'll take the vote on that. So raise your hands if you wish to accept the alternative motion as described.
Yes, that's unanimous.
Very good. Okay, so that is approved. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll now move to item 8, which is DC 2180, which is Woodfords, Shipley Road, Southwater, Horsham. The officer recommendation is to approve permission subject to the completion of a legal agreement and subject to any further representations resulting from reconsultation on water neutrality report. And I'll hand over to the officers for their presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. So I referred to the addendum on this one that outlines comments that have been received since the committee report was published, including comments on the water neutrality statements. And the addendum also refers to an amended recommendation, which is now subject to updated ecology reports being submitted prior to the application being approved. We've also received an objection from Southwater Parish on the grounds of inappropriate development in the countryside, the impact to landscape character of the area, highway impacts, and securing the water neutrality arrangements. So we see the location plan. The site is east of Shipley Road, south of the built-up area boundary of Southwater, formed of 2 relatively flat fields dissected in the middle by a row of trees. The site includes buildings in association with a dwelling called Woodfords. The main farmhouse is considered a non-designated heritage asset and will be retained as part of the proposal. Some brief photos of the site. You can see here there's mainly fields. And this is part of the farmhouse to be retained as part of the proposal, which is considered a non-designated heritage asset. Let's go to the proposed layouts. This is an indicative plan as the application is an outline for 73 dwellings, and the details will be approved as part of reserve matters in the event it was approved. This shows retention of the existing farmhouse on the west side of the site and the trees around the site, including the retention of the trees through the middle of the site. They see the vehicle access is proposed from Shipley Road, and that is proposed as part of the details of the application. The site includes attenuation ponds, play area, and a pumping station. So here we see examples of the type of housing proposed. Again, these are indicative only, as the design of the houses would be approved at reserve matters stage, if approved at outline. See that these houses are appropriately designed with a traditional appearance. Back to the block plan. As outlined in the report, this scheme is a resubmission of a previously refused scheme for the same proposal. The previous scheme was dismissed at appeal, but only on the grounds of insufficient details relating to water neutrality. The only consideration in this current scheme is whether the dismissal of the previous scheme on water neutrality grounds has been adequately addressed. As outlined in the report, Horsham District Council no longer has an updated local plan or a 5-year housing supply. Therefore, the principle of development in the countryside cannot be resisted in this instance. The proposal is considered appropriate on all of the grounds, including highway impacts, landscape impacts, and impacts on residents, as outlined in the report, and as agreed with by the inspector in the previous appeal. The proposal also includes 40% affordable housing, that's above our normal 35% housing requirement, and 5% custom build units, which are these are material considerations in determination of this application. In terms of water neutrality, proposed dwellings would include water efficient fixtures and fittings and rainwater harvesting tanks. However, this in itself is not enough to make the proposal water neutral, and offsetting is required. So the applicant is proposing to offset this development through retrofitting measures to 227 homes in Crawley. This is within the Sussex water neutrality area. These are managed by Raven Homes. Extensive surveys and reports have been submitted along with a comprehensive water neutrality statement, which outlines that the measures in place, the scheme at Woodfords would be water neutral with considerable headroom. We're currently in discussion with Crawley Borough Council regarding the enforcement of the offsetting measures to be secured through a 106 agreement or a separate agreement. Therefore, the scheme has overcome the reason for the previous dismissal of the scheme for exactly the same proposal, and the proposal is recommended in accordance with the conditions and completion of the lead agreement as outlined in the report and the addendum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have 5 speakers on this one. The first one is Justin Tyler, once again, our guest star of the night. You have 2 minutes. You'll need to switch on. Try not to switch it off afterwards, just leave it on. Yeah, thank you.
Justin Tyler, Executive Officer for South Woodham Parish Council. As was in the case with DC 22564, the Parish Council objects to the proposed development due to the adverse landscape impacts and impact on highway safety. This is a countryside location not suitable for development such as this. This landscape has little capacity for change without there being significant harm. Turning to highway safety, as part of the site allocation process for the neighbourhood plan, highway capacity assessments were undertaken which determined that the area's highway network is at capacity. The Parish Council are concerned about additional congestion on Shipley Road and increased vehicle movements onto Worthing Road that would result from this development. These roads form main routes to schools, the village centre and homes, and increased congestion could reduce safety for residents. There are speed limit signs to the north of the application site indicating a change from 30 miles an hour to the national speed limit. Drivers exiting the village accelerate rapidly as they meet the speed limit signs due to the rural nature of the road. The Stage 1 road safety audit recommends that the speed limit sign is moved to the south of the site, but it doesn't appear that this has been actioned. Drivers commonly accelerate out of the village into the countryside past the access to the site, creating risks for anyone exiting the junction. This is evidenced by the transport statement, which highlights that there have been serious and fatal accidents in this location, and this presents significant concerns. If this proposal is granted permission, traffic calming measures must be agreed with West Sussex County Council to ensure compliance with Policy 40 of HDPF, which requires development to provide safe access. Without appropriate measures, South Woodham Parish Council strongly objects to the application for the safety of our residents and due to the unacceptable landscape harm. If the committee is minded to approve this application, South Woodham Parish Council requests you to give consideration to the situation regarding Section 106, still and housing numbers, recognising that it will be Southwater who undoubtedly absorb the impact of the development and disturbance without any benefit to having a recognised neighbourhood plan where we have allocated housing in place.
Thank you very much. Second speaker is Richard Shepherd, and You also have 2 minutes.
Good evening, members, and thank you. Well said. I think Southwater Parish and Shipley Parish echo everything that is felt by residents in Shipley Road. My name is Richard Shepherd. I've been a resident of Shipley Road since 2011, so we've lived there with my family for 12 years. Short statement to open. Nobody, not as a person or a parish council, welcomes this conceptual development. Not Shipley Parish in which it lies, nor the village of Southwater upon which its resources these houses will draw upon, but which reside conveniently referred to as local amenities and sources of employment and schooling. I don't need to delve further into that topic, as the severe lack of all of the so-called amenity and resources well documented by many upon many already. So what this case has come down to, since the appeals officer rejected the planning application appeal last time for what is fundamentally the same application again this time, is the matter of water alone. We're here to ask the committee to give yourselves time to please understand properly that which has been put before you as conceptual evidence only, not proof of water neutrality on West Sussex water resources. I come from a technical business of engineering, and I know very well that because someone put some metrics on a page and quotes some standards against it, it doesn't make it robust, deliverable, or true. We see such plays all the time with the skewed reporting and abatement of emissions to suit a given situation. What makes anyone not working for or on behalf of Reside an expert to date in what they have presented with so far? And that just because you take away somebody else's water use over here and you solve the problem over there, that approach does not necessarily work, and it certainly doesn't work with emission strategies. There will be things that are not yet understood about what seems on the surface like a simple matter of give and take. What makes engineering and design such as this robust, such that we can stake our futures and that of our countryside on it, is the scrutiny of independent verification and independent conclusion. Ultimately, the data on water that has been put in front of you has been paid for by Reside, the intended developers. They can quote flow rates and they can quote building standards, but it doesn't fulfill the category of independent scrutiny and so does not fulfill a robust design. HDC don't know whether any of this is truly true. From a technical perspective or not, how can they be fully knowing unless they have the data and methodology scrutinized? Natural England has been mentioned in the committee report addendum, which we have read, but they have not approved this, and the two should not be mistaken. From a non-technical perspective...
You've gone over 2 minutes. If you could draw your remarks to a conclusion. Great. Looks like I've got quite a bit there.
Maybe I could just do the last paragraph, if that's okay. Thank you. From a non-technical matter of how this conception or data-based water saving will be enforced forever into the future until such time as water in Sussex or the south of England is no longer an issue at all, which is likely never going to be the case, we have seen no evidence of a legal framework which protects the water saving measures to enable the building of 73 new houses on greenfields. It has not been demonstrated to HDC or the public for scrutiny whether Reside will not be allowed to sell these Crawley houses for a period of potentially maybe 50 years, say, or whether there will be enforcement on a future owner that they cannot change anything on the properties of their water devices. Who is going to protect and police that when no mechanism currently exists? The very present issue of water neutrality into the future is not understood fully and could come back to bite us horribly in the near or further future. We please urge that councillors give the District Council a proper amount of time to investigate and test the claims made by Reside that they will be having zero impact on West Sussex water, as this will be setting a not fully understood precedent.
That's a very long last paragraph.
If it is approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can we go to the third speaker, which is Andrew Munton. Thank you.
Chair, councillors, thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak this evening. I'm Andrew Munton, Planning Director at Reside Developments, a local award-winning, independent, high-quality developer. Reside Developments is a conscientious developer that constantly delivers high-quality, sustainable housing schemes across the South East. Reside has worked tirelessly with your officers to create a high-quality development fitting of a beautiful village like Southwater. My colleague Dr. Lyons will explain the scheme's benefits in more detail. But this development achieved water neutrality, as agreed by Natural England.
The new homes will be built with water saving and water efficient fixtures and fittings. In addition, the homes will have an element of rainwater capture to serve certain aspects of the home, such as toilets. Further to the on-site water saving measures, we have been working with Raven Housing Trust on a scheme of improving water efficiency of their existing housing stock, consisting of over 200 homes. Such improvements include more water efficient showers, taps, and toilets. Together, these two elements of our scheme achieve water neutrality for the 73 proposed new homes. This has been assessed by your officers and Natural England, who both confirmed that the site achieves water neutrality. It is vital that we all work collaboratively to deliver new homes that are in so much need. I therefore ask that you endorse your officer's recommendation and approve this planning application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, can I call Chris Lyons, please?
Good evening, councillors. My name is Chris Lyons and I'm a planning consultant advising Reside. This scheme has taken a long time to get to this stage, as we've listened carefully to the comments made and taken on board all of the suggestions made by your officers. As a result, we believe the proposals before you is a high quality development. I'd like to thank your officers for the input during both this application and the previous one. The development proposes 73 dwellings in a sustainable location. The inspector commented on the appeal scheme that the benefit of the additional housing here is a matter that would attract very significant weight. The inspector also concluded the development would provide a suitable location for housing. The housing supply has obviously reduced since then, and so the need for housing is even greater. The reason the appeal for the previous scheme was dismissed was due to water neutrality, and the inspector was satisfied that other technical issues, including landscape and highways, had all been resolved. We have now negotiated a solution to water neutrality that has taken some time to ensure there is both a thorough and robust solution. With Natural England and your officers are now satisfied this matter has been addressed. As a result, I trust you will agree with your officers' recommendation and support the application. However, I'd like to remind you of some of the benefits of the application before I finish. 73 new dwellings to help meet housing demand, 26 much needed affordable homes. This includes a mixture of first homes, shared ownership and social rent. 5% of homes will be custom self-build. A high quality development with two design characters, the northern section reflecting the housing in Southwater and the southern section, as you've seen, with a more rural feel based around the retention of the existing building. A large area of open space with a play area and a trim trail around the site, and significant biodiversity net gain with water features, hedgerows and trees. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our final speaker on this issue is Matthew Payne, speaking on behalf of Shipley Parish Council, and you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. As a parish council, we've recently observed that water neutrality statements tend to be completely unrealistic. And we've also had serious concerns about the application and enforcement of any commitments, as it requires a huge amount of resource, funding and sacrifice by committed parties and the LPA if we are to take regulations seriously and ensure that water offsetting and reduction commitments are monitored as Natural England expects, and the correct water usage is enforced for what is likely to be at least the next 20 years until a replacement water source comes online, likely to be a reservoir. We note there are no recommendations in the Part C report as to how enforcement or monitoring of water usage might be achieved, and is repetitively referred to simply as LPA monitoring. When Natural England's expectations are that offsetting measures are expected to last for many years to come, the only way that this can be achieved and passed on to future owners of the 187 properties in Crawley, in this case is with a deed of covenant or similar, is attached to the title of the property in question, obligating owners to a maximum usage of an average of 89 litres per day in this instance. We don't agree that this is not enforceable. As per the note in addendum point 3.1, it is very easily enforced with the right will, the right funding, resources and time, which I expect is where the real challenge lies. Looking at clause 14 in the report, it appears Reside and Raven will only be committed to a section 106 agreement with proof of how flow restriction measures provided by photograph, with a commitment made not to change the plumbing thereafter. If this is the extent of monitoring and enforcement, then very little water reduction will actually take place. The following would need to happen to make sure that commitment remained forever, and why would it not? The new house is going to be there forever, so why wouldn't the offsetting commitment be there forever as well? A Section 106 agreement between Reside and Raven will not commit a future property owner to the 2023 commitments, and it will be down to blind luck alone whether any water consumption remains in place for more than a year or two. We already know anecdotally at sites like Broadacres in Southwater that homeowners and tenants replace their water saving valves after moving in. Current monitoring and enforcement is not fit for purpose. So first, there needs to be a deed of covenant for each offsetting property, which places a restrictive covenant against the title recording the offsetting commitments, both in terms of restrictions and metered usage. It is quite common for any covenants on a property to be applied in this way, a right of way or a boundary maintenance, for example. If the claim is that a property will use 89 litres of water a day, that commitment needs to be legally committed to and tied to the property with sanctions for failure to do so. Otherwise, there is no point to this water neutrality strategy at all. Secondly, the usage needs to be checked, perhaps annually, with the appropriate fines in place for failing to hit these targets, along with secondary commitments to place in tenancy agreements, for example, where a property may become rented. The real reason this is supposedly unenforceable is simply down to funding and profit. Firstly, neither Reside and certainly not Raven would likely entertain such a commitment or enforcement. Such a covenant would significantly devalue the capital value of these properties in Crawley, possibly require third-party consents from lenders depending on funding, and who may refuse, and a significant expense and piece of work to administrate in the first place. Then there's the team at Horsham District Council who would be required to enforce it. No doubt they won't want to have to fund that, nor will the applicant or the offsetter wish to bankroll either as part of their Section 106 contributions. Some of which, if we cannot guarantee to hit these reduced water consumption rates by legally enforcing all future owners and occupiers, then any water neutrality statements become meaningless. I'd also like to draw Council's attention to the calculations in the water neutrality report. Some of these numbers seem both very low at Woodfords and in Crawley. I appreciate Natural England have approved this report subject to the mitigation measures put in place, but have they really tested some of the claims? Are the water's usage claims practical and achievable? We suspect not. For example, the average flow rate of a shower is 15 litres per minute with good water pressure. The report claims usage of 26 litres of water per day per person for showering in Appendix E, meaning each person is going to shower for a maximum of 1 minute and 43 seconds per day, or a shower once every 3 days. Similarly, their baths claim to only use 130 litres of water and would only be used by each person once every 9 days. However, the average bath holds 300 litres of water if filled to the brim, and the average shower time in the UK is recognised to be 5 minutes or 75 litres of water. Here it appears residents are going to have a shower every 3 days and a bath every 9 days, and even then only in 23 centimetres of water, which is barely enough to cover your legs. Likewise, the average flow rate from a running tap is 6 litres per minute, but occupiers at Woodfords apparently are only going to run their taps for 1 minute per day based on this plan. It's very clear that most of these usage rates are way below the levels that are used by people in everyday life, understated to reduce the amount of offsetting required to get the numbers to fit. Irrespective of ambition on water usage, whether 125 or 85 litres per person per day, according to Statista, the average person in the UK actually uses 152 litres of water per day. So residents in this plan are being committed to a reduction of 41% of their daily accepted average usage, which we believe is not practical or likely to be achieved, especially when no one will be monitoring or enforcing the numbers. So we would like to recommend a deferral until such time as this can be evidenced to the contrary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would officers like to respond at all at this point?
We take the points on board, and we do know this is like a very big undertaking, something maybe that we haven't come across before, the retrofitting of properties that aren't such many properties and not even within our district, they're in Crawley. So it is something new. We understand we have received considerable evidence, and they've surveyed all these properties, and I don't think we could have really asked any more of them. We've asked them for all this evidence and the assessments, and from our point of view, they've done everything we've said, and they've submitted everything said, and we can't ask them to do any more, to be honest, at this point. And so we feel it's appropriate, and and Natural England also agree with it. And the thing to consider with this is there is considerable headroom here. So with the offsetting of this properties, there's going to be a considerable amount of, it's about 2,000 litres, 2,279 litres per day, which is a considerable amount. So that allows some discrepancies in the water neutrality and the water usage. And in terms of the enforcement, these are the kind of details we'd have to secure in a 106 agreement, and we'd have to agree with Crawley about how they're going to be enforced. And so that's either going to be in the section 106 or a separate agreement between us. But we are in discussions with them about that. And this is going to become more commonplace, to be honest, because we've also got Chichester, and they're going to have offsetting in our district as well. So there is going to have to cross district agreements in place. So this is going to become more common, and we're going to have to potentially enforce somebody like Chichester or Crawley's offsetting, which potentially will happen here. And we have had examples of that. Not to this scale, but there are some applications of that happening already. And the thing about the 106 is it will be like a phased approach. So there'll be monitoring in place, and we'd get the monitoring fees for that. And they'd have to show that a certain amount of properties have been retrofitted before they can occupy a certain amount of properties. So it will be a phased approach to ensure that the retrofitting is in place in order for those houses that have been occupied to be water neutral. And so that will be ongoing as part of the 106. So we feel that is appropriate and subject to us just agreeing those details in the 106. But we have already got examples of similar 106 agreements. I think for the Barclays scheme for phase 5 is one that's going to be completed soon. So it's not uncommon to have these obligations in a 106.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to go to the local members, which. Okay. We'll take a 5-minute comfort break for that general. Okay, we'll get going again, and we're just coming to the local members to speak on this item. So, Councillor Stannard, I think you go first.
Let me start by thanking the contributors to this debate, which particularly I think the contribution from Shipley Parish Council. We are at an interesting time because we are now at the cutting edge of our understanding of what water neutrality means. And there is a danger that if we act in haste, we will repent at leisure and we will create precedents which will open a barn door and ruin what has been a pretty clear statement of the importance of not ignoring water neutrality. Good law requires proper policing, enforcement, and penalties. Otherwise, it's meaningless. If you have a traffic calming measure, you have it because it's enforced. If it's not, there's no point having it. And it doesn't appear to me at the moment that there is much clarity about the enforcement and penalties associated with such mitigation, notwithstanding the fact that it also includes, of course, Crawley, and that adds another layer of confusion and potential cost and challenge. When you add to that and we were laughing because they do seem nonsensical, the levels of usage, I think we can all see that we need to be careful, to repeat my phrase, we don't act in haste and repent at leisure. There are a number of problems. First of all, who is going to enforce in 2029 the person who bought a house and rips out all of the water enforcement taps and valves? What's going to stop them doing it? Who's going to police them and stop them doing it? And who will, what penalty will there be? Well, clearly none. Deed of covenants, who's going to write them? They cost a lot of money. Who's going to pick up the £200,000 bill to write 187 deed of covenants, or whatever the number is? When tenants move in, will in the tenancy agreement, the water neutrality measures be in the tenancy agreement? Who will enforce that? The landlord? Who will be, what penalties will there be for tenants who overuse water? In 2036, when most of us will have lost interest in what we're talking about now, many years ago. By your own admission, we are still in communication about how we're going to do this. Until we know how we're going to do this, we shouldn't approve doing it. We need to know how we're going to enforce these policies well into the future, whether the levels of usage are appropriate or not, how we're going to deal with people retrofitting after it's been done, how we're going to affect tenants, as I've raised. There are so many how are we going to do this, that there's a danger here of us not taking water neutrality seriously. Either we take it seriously or we don't. If we take it seriously, we have to make difficult decisions. There have to be legally binding, in perpetuity arrangements, which could be expensive to administer, expensive to police, or we don't take it seriously. So either we're saying we don't believe water neutrality is important anymore, and if we do this, it will create precedent for any number of other similar sized developments, or we're saying we do take it seriously and we need to pause. Now, I might argue that the development needs some changes, but I'm talking here about whether we have achieved water neutrality. And good law is only good law if it can be enforced, policed, and monitored. And there appears to be many reasons why that is not going to happen, not least again with regard to meter usage. Who's checking the people are keeping to that level? Are they submitting annual meter readings? To whom? What penalties will there be if they exceed them? We don't know the answer to these questions. Until we do, and the lawyers have gone away and cogitated and come back, we can't make a decision on this proposal. We shouldn't bin it off, but it does need a much more clear and discreet and legally enforceable forever, not for 6 months, not a photograph taken when it was built, but who's going to enforce it in 2036? Who's responsible? Crawley, HDC? We don't know. So let's find out first, and when we find out, or we know what those answers are, come back, and if that takes 6 months, well, so be it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would officers like to respond at this point?
I think officers acknowledge that this is a first for Horsham, and it's a first for water neutrality in terms of offsetting in a neighbouring authority. It is a principle, though, that has been established through nutrient neutrality. So the principle of offsetting in another authority and securing that through legal agreements, including the enforcement of that, is an established principle, and that's been established through, as I say, through nutrient neutrality. And we've got a number of examples of officers which we have been reviewing. So the principle's there. I think some of the points Councillor Stannard has raised, it's kind of, we've already discussed in previous committees, is that there is a local planning authority can enforce, and early on, obviously, we sought council advice on that in terms of we can enforce against those obligations. The penalties are generally those of a planning authority, so you have certain obligations that you can enforce against within a legal agreement or conditions, your enforcement notice, your breach of condition, etc., are all those standard matters. But officers do acknowledge this is a first for Horsham and for water neutrality. And whilst we are confident the legal agreements can address the points made, clearly we don't have that before you. Obviously, that's not common. We don't come with a legal agreement. It's usually subject to condition. But officers acknowledge this is a first for Horsham. And we don't have all of the details, though we are confident these can be addressed through the legal agreements. Thank you.
No doubt you can egress them when you can. We'll speak again.
Thank you. If I go to Councillor Lindsay, please.
Thank you. I agree with what Ian's just explained, and I also take the point that Emma's answered. But I think we could be a bit firmer in our conditions in this paper, because the preoccupation condition on item 14 in the paper, it doesn't specifically say that all water saving measures in the 187 Ravens Housing Trust houses have been installed. Because if you read the item 14, I think part G, the way I read part G refers to the calculation of the savings, the development of water saving equipment in this the reside development. It doesn't mention the Ravens Housing Trust fitments to save water, because before we can actually occupy the first house on the reside development, 100% of the 187 houses in the Ravens Housing Trust development, they need to be fitted with the equipment, and it needs to be verified that they've all had the equipment properly installed, and we've tested it to make sure that it does actually achieve the savings, because it's the savings from this Ravens Housing Trust that actually make this development possibly get water neutrality. I think a lot of the arguments about that from Shipley put forward are pretty relevant, because it's very interesting that the government as a whole is talking about setting water usage per person targets, but they're talking about 2050 before they do it, and they're talking about having targets of 110 litres per person in 2050. And now we are talking about trying to achieve 90 litres per person in 2024 or 25. So I do think that we need to be a bit firmer in setting the conditions here. They're not made very clear in the paper.
Thank you, Councillor Lindsay. It's a fair point. Clearly, it's important to secure the measures not only on the site itself but on Raven Homes. We can't add conditions relating to the site at Raven Homes because the conditions relate to the application site. So we would need to secure the measures in Raven Homes via the legal agreement. So that's detailed in the addendum and within the report. So it cannot be a condition, but it would certainly be secured by a legal agreement. And I agree water neutrality means we are ahead of the game at Horsham. Obviously the local plan is proposing 85 litres per person per day. So it's certainly achievable. And obviously we've already granted developments that deliver that. So we know it can be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I go to Councillor Peter Burgess, please?
Thanks. If we look at the appeal and the dismissal, it's the appeal inspector would have allowed this because HDC, if we go back to the basics, we don't have the correct land supply. It's not our fault, we just don't have it. We thought we did. So in earlier days, before water neutrality, it is very likely that we would have to agree to this particular development because we don't have these safeguards. And that still really exists. There's been no real change since we started our various plans in the past, which I'm not going into. So it all boils down to water neutrality. Frankly, ladies and gentlemen, if you're building new buildings where none existed before, you've got to find a water supply for them, and that can only come from actually new bores or borrowing water from, say, Thames, who have a surplus. Maybe they don't. And incidentally, remember Thames is the one who are already saying if they find that they've got plans, that if they find you're using too much water, you'll get penalised for it financially and other things. So we need to be careful about that. So if you get this water, my view on this, we'll cut that site down and that'll give us water neutrality. I know Emma doesn't agree with this, but it's a question of common sense. If you're building new buildings and you're going to give them water or electricity or sewage or gas or anything else, it needs to be available, and the water isn't. And we've got this convoluted plan where, okay, we'll borrow water from him or her to give to here. And when I looked through the water, the paper that came out on water, it goes even further than that. What we'll do is we'll borrow water from developments that haven't actually been built yet. Now we're going into realms where my head hurts, and I'm afraid it's rather difficult. In my view, I'm sorry to say, restricting water supply is not an option for existing settlements. And some of the speakers, including Ian and the parish councillor from Shipley, have shown us very clearly why this is. Plus, the other thing is people are greedy. It's all right saying, I'm sorry, but you can only use 30 litres of water per day, or in our case, what is it, 85 currently? But there are people, a lot of people, remember in the drought, last year, there were people who were not on water meters who were using enormous amounts of water to make their grass greener, and nothing could be done about it because we didn't have anything in place to stop it. Ian went on about, and he's quite right, if you're going to have water neutrality and you're going to have enforceable things, you've got to be able to enforce them. And how are you going to do that? I remember in 1947, most of you don't, I suspect, but at 8 o'clock in the morning, a policeman would come round and check you weren't using any electricity. Now that was not popular. It was in the very cold spell at that stage. So I'm really sorry to say that whether we agree to this, if we'd have had the things in place, the housing supply and things like that, this development on a greenfield site would not have been allowed. Officers would not have been recommending it. Things have now changed a lot. We don't have, as I said earlier, the housing supply. So it all goes around water neutrality. I'm sorry to say it's not enforceable. It's pie in the sky in my view, actually. And I'm really am particularly worried about this development and whether the water supply is going to be adequate. Because what will happen is if water runs short, it's you who will be subject to restrictions. And again, in the 70s, having in a particular drought, having to take my bottles to a standpipe in the street as the only way I could flush my loo or bath or wash, it gets really uncomfortable. Thanks.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we have to recognise, and I think members do recognise, that the principle of offsetting to mitigate the water use of one development in principle is acceptable. So you can mitigate the impact of water use by offsetting on another site. That principle is established. We've considered applications on that basis at committee before. Both ourselves at Horsham, Chichester and Crawley are all using that principle. So I think we have to recognise the principle of offsetting on other homes in the water resource zone is acceptable. Clearly there are mechanics around how that works and how that's secured. And again, the principle of water neutrality is not to turn somebody's tap off when they reach a certain limit. It's on averages, and that's the basis on which we've been working for the last year and a half since we've been dealing with water neutrality. And obviously there is significant headroom in this case. You've got 2,279 litres of headroom in this case, which we have to recognise provides significant headroom for any deviations in the figures before us. Thank you. Oh, and please don't encourage boreholes because they're a real headache. Thank you. Boreholes. We don't want any more boreholes.
Thank you. Just so I've got 5 speakers, and I'll take them in the order I got them. First of all, Councillor Vickers, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The appeal decision that was dismissed was simply on water neutrality grounds, so therefore that is absolutely the only thing that I'm going to comment on this evening. It's a very complex issue, and we must get it right what we do. We might be in the same water zone as Crawley, but we won't be monitoring or enforcing any offsetting. I'm not convinced that the water neutrality implementation strategy can be satisfactorily monitored or that the compliance will be enforceable. My suggestion is that we defer a decision on this to get proper legal advice to reassure us that this can be addressed in perpetuity. I know officers have been in discussions with Crawley, but I need to understand how the agreement with Crawley will work. So I would like to suggest that we defer the decision, get some legal advice, because we need to be sure that the Section 106 agreement is sound
in perpetuity and is watertight. No pun intended. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take that motion a little bit later, just allow a few more people to speak. Councillor Newton.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. This is, in my opinion, a slick and cynical application using the minimum requirements to satisfy water neutrality. And on top of that, it's in a totally inappropriate rural location. And personally, I would have absolutely no hesitation in refusing to accept this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Bevis.
Thank you, Chairman. Several councillors have remarked about how complex this is, especially Councillor Stannard, and they're quite right. And yet, yesterday we had an addendum to the recommendations on this report, which I think, for something this complex, is unacceptable. Part of that addendum was saying that rainwater harvesting would have to allow for 35 days of rain to be stored. Well, 35 days is about 8 metric tonnes. So I think that's going to change the design of these properties. And yet, that's a throwaway remark in an addendum. And it's things like that that really give me great cause for concern on this. One other point I would make, and I don't think this has been properly explored. At the Standards Committee last year, they considered a report from the Ombudsman where a tenant was eventually given £500 compensation by this council because they were put in a property with water neutrality fittings and fixtures such that they couldn't clean their colostomy bag. So I think there are a lot of other concerns that haven't been properly addressed that will come out of the woodwork. I take Councillor Stannard's point entirely that we need to approach this slowly and carefully and cautiously because we don't quite know what we're dealing with at the moment. Thank you.
Councillor Bevis, I take your point about the addendum yesterday. That the 35 days was in the initial report, though. I think there was a further question raised by members, and so we felt that it would be useful to include that within the addendum. So those details were already in the initial report, and also they are on the council's website in terms of our Q&As to applicants. So I think it was just to highlight it, but I take your point. There was an addendum yesterday. Thank you.
Could I then ask whether 8 metric tonnes is achievable in a normal loft?
It's a standard that we've worked with in terms of the 35 days to account for periods of drought, and it has been accepted. I'm not a technical expert, so I wouldn't want to give confidence on that, but it has been accepted.
Could we have a technical reply to that before we accept this report?
Well, we're going to go for a motion to defer later, so that may become academic. Okay, I'll go to Councillor Horsham, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was very impressed by the speakers this evening. I thought the Parish Council of Shipley, the statements about the amount of time people spend in a shower and have a bath, rung true. And the training I've had as a councillor on water neutrality stated that it takes 6 or 7 houses to be retrofitted to deliver enough water to supply one. And the evidence that the officers have presented for me this evening have left me feeling lacklustre. And I've read the report and I've looked through it, and I don't see enough evidence there for me to support this. For me to support this application, and I totally understand we're totally talking about water neutrality. I don't have enough evidence in front of me to support this application. I was impressed by Jason's comments around that the Section 106 agreement was going to be staggered and it was going to be necessary for the developer to prove that a certain number of houses have been retrofitted. I guess I'd love to go one step further, and not that they're retrofitted, that the retrofitted is working, that they retrofit 10 houses and it delivers the water saving that it's said to. So I fully support if Councillor Stannard is putting a recommendation to defer this, and I appreciate we could be held to account for fail to determine because we've cancelled the next Planning South and we're going to go after the election now, but hopefully that the developer could retrofit 5-10 houses and prove to us that this is working. It's based on the evidence I've heard so far, my personal knowledge of water neutrality, the water consumption rates from the Shipley Parish Council it sounds ludicrous, the reductions from Muscala housing. So I'm happy to second. I'm sure you'll have lots of seconders in the room if Councillor Stannard is putting a recommendation to defer forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bradman.
I was just thinking, Chairman, that you know what a turnabout. You know, you and this committee and the officers also know that I've never been very keen on this offsetting and monitoring it, policing it, and all the rest of it. But personally, on this particular application, I would have thought it's much better to offset in Crawley with a number of houses than it was only 2 months ago to pass 23 houses in my ward, where the water mitigation is going to be rain coming from a cowshed. So, you know, I'm not, you know, I'm in two minds about it, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Minto.
Thank you, Chair. So we appear to live in a situation where offsetting, as it's been described, is acceptable. But I didn't agree to that or vote for that, and I don't agree with that to a certain extent. So by accepting a proposal where we accept that offsetting is a principle we should adhere to, then I suppose by default I'm accepting, I agree with the principle. So I'm really challenged with that. Thank you, Tony. Now my brain works on fact and not theory. So until a developer can come to committee with their water neutrality savings kind of in the tank, excuse the pun, but delivered, suppose I'm going to always be sceptical on these things. I'm also saddened that the burden of delivery always seems to fall on people that are in housing association or social rent. It's not spread across the whole population. So I've kind of got a bit of a concern about human rights and enforcing this on individuals that didn't even know it was coming. So I have a real problem with that. Now, I understand this will be challenged. I understand that if this does get rejected and it goes to appeal, then obviously we could be in a difficult situation there. But I generally think we should use our position to say that we need a better solution for this. We really do need to think of a better way of doing this, because eventually we're going to run out of people to offset against, and it's just ludicrous to me. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fletcher. Then we'll go back to...
Thank you. We're only here considering this application now because we're operating under the tilted balance, and the inspector has confirmed that the only issue that prevented this going through before was water neutrality. However, the world is constantly moving on, and in December, West Sussex passed a new policy about speed limits and changed the criteria under which a lower speed limit of 20 or 30 miles an hour is appropriate. So given that it looks like we're actually potentially heading for a deferral here, and we have presumably a developer who wishes to be a good developer, and West Sussex who should be being very mindful of their actual current policy on this, I'd like to ask whether we could look at one of the key issues that everybody has agreed was an issue with the development plans as they stand, which is the 60-mile-an-hour limit on the road outside the development, and see whether during the period of deferral we can find a way to work with that and see if we can come to an arrangement where the speed limit could be reviewed in the light of West Sussex's new speed limit policy that came into force on the 22nd of December.
Thank you very much. I'll put that back to Councillor Vickers, whose motion it was. Would you?
Yes, Chairman, please. I'd like to ask for this to be deferred so we can get convincing legal advice that we can enforce and monitor the offsetting. I'm just looking to see what else I said, so we can have reassurance that the Section 106 agreement can put in place the offsetting measures in perpetuity. Thank you.
Are you amenable to including the addition from Councillor Fletcher there on asking highways to review the speed limit in light of their. Yeah, okay, we can include that as well. It's getting to be a very long version.
I also think it's important that we do there's quite a lot to be done. Quite a lot, and I think it's probably easier for us to say that we have concerns about lots of we can listen. I think it's not. I'm not sure whether that's helpful or not, but I think you would have to know his concern about that. My concern about tenancy agreements is we can at least think 2018. There's so many concerns having it only about this having it continue. So yeah, coming from the technical, I don't want to be able to chat.
I think we do need a definitive deferral. Well, I think some of them perhaps are outside the remit of planning in any event. But I think we do need a clear list. Obviously, we've had a lengthy debate today, and we do need a clear direction in terms of what officers should be doing. And I think my understanding is clearly members consider there's further work needed in terms of how it will be enforced and how that agreement would take place with Crawley. Obviously, we've now got further comment in terms of the speed limit and oh yes, and the technical capacity of buildings to contain the level of rainwater harvesting. But clearly that needs to be a motion put forward by you, Councillor Vickers, with those changes. Because you put forward the initial motion.
I'm happy to include those extras if everybody else thinks that's satisfactory, but my main concern is to make sure that we understand how we can monitor and enforce the offsetting perpetuity.
What I'm going to do, we'll read out as we understand the motion to be, and then you can second, and then we will take a vote.
So yeah, Councillor Vickers, what I've got here is a deferral of the motion to seek convincing legal advice regarding the enforceability and monitoring of offsetting and reassurance that the Section 106 can put in place those measures in perpetuity for a review of the speed limit on the main roads. I haven't got the name of the road. Shipley Road, sorry, big problem. Shipley Road, in light of new policy by Highways West Sussex County Council with respect to when a 20 to 30 mile per hour speed limit is appropriate. And also to consider the technical capacity of buildings with respect to weight rainwater harvesting.
I can second that.
Great. That's a test. I don't think anyone would succeed. But okay, so we'll. That is the motion. I won't go read it out again. All those in favour of the motion to defer, please raise your hands.
Yes, that's unanimous.
Great. Okay. Next item. So our last item today is DC 221878, 36 Warren Drive, Southwater, Horsham. It comes with an officer recommendation to approve, and if I could hand over to the officer to make the presentation. Thank you. Sorry, just one moment. Sorry, Councillor Britton. I appreciate you have back issues, etc. So yeah. Okay, same for Councillor Lindsay. Thank you. Okay, you carry on.
Okay, so as a final item, since the report was published, 2 additional objections have been received from adjacent properties regarding the application. Here we see the site relates to a detached 2-storey dwelling at Warren Drive in Southwater. You can see the site highlighted there in red. Here's a close-up of the site with a block plan, and this shows a proposed dwelling in place to the side guarding of the existing dwelling. So as I said, this shows the proposed dwelling following the demolition of the existing side conservatory, access to Warren Drive. So this is a photo of the side of the property. So this is where the new house is proposed to go, in the side garden of the existing property following demolition of the conservatory shown there. This would be the access to the site, so it would be in between the existing garage and the front of the existing house there, with the grass taken away to provide a new access. So here we see the designs and layouts of the proposed dwelling. So appropriate design in a traditional appearance with a cat side roof, the dormer window will be a two-bedroom dwelling. And this shows the front of the house with the context of the existing dwelling. So you see it's a similar height and similar scale, and they're similar in terms of its appearance to the existing property. So as part of the application, there is an access that goes in between the existing house and garage. So what we asked for is to clarify that through this vehicle tracking, which shows that it is appropriate access. This previous scheme was refused partly on the lack of parking and due to the fact that it didn't have water neutrality, sufficient water neutrality. So to address that, the scheme includes additional parking spaces, now 3 parking spaces, and the scheme also includes appropriate water neutrality statements. And we've also asked the officer to check the distances on site to show that this is actually a correct representation of what's on site in terms of the access. So that shows where the access is going to go in between, so it shows there's plenty of space there where the existing car is shown there. So that, as I said, this follows a recent refusal in terms of and that was refused on the grounds of the parking, which now has been increased to address that, and also through the water neutrality statement. So to address that, they've submitted an appropriate water neutrality statement which shows water efficiency measures to the new house and also to the existing house, and that in itself makes the scheme water neutrality subject to those measures being in place, and we received no objection from Natural England on those grounds. So the scheme is recommended for approval in accordance with the recommendations in the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 3 speakers on this one. The first is, apologies if I pronounce this wrong, but Kerry Mann, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm speaking on behalf of 25 individual householders, and specifically the 3 householders who share a driveway with 36 Warren Drive, of which I'm one, all of whom have objected to this proposal. This proposal provides for a poorly designed, unsafe, unmanageable means of access to the proposed site. The vehicle tracking plan supplied by the applicant incorporates the use of land which is not in their legal ownership, is not shared driveway, and is therefore without right of passage. It is also dependent upon unrealistically considerate, impractical parking of current and future occupiers of number 36. By this, I mean the occupiers would need to restrict their own parking to just 5 metres of a private 7-metre parking space, and with vehicles placed right up to the garage door, such that doors cannot be opened. The representations made within the plan are false and misleading and are not deliverable. Any variation to the proposed vehicle access requires the loss of car parking for the existing property. The current garage does not meet planning specifications to be considered as parking space, and as such, they would be left with a single car parking space. This is unacceptable for a 4-bedroom dwelling and would result in an increase in daily parking in the already congested on-street parking bays. The access plan also delivers a primary vehicle route for the proposed dwelling, which runs extraordinarily close to the front door of the existing dwelling. With the vehicular turns that we know will be involved and which are missing from the inaccurate tracking plan, this is both unsafe and is to the detriment of the amenity of the existing dwelling. Horsham District Planning Framework Policy 32 indicates that development will be expected to provide an attractive, functional, accessible, safe, and adaptable environment. These requirements are not met with this proposal, despite spurious attempts to suggest otherwise. A clear sign of overdevelopment is the inability to present a factual plan. That the occupier of the existing dwelling is prepared to tolerate a lower level of amenity and safety than planning policies promote in order to encourage planning permission to be granted should not weigh in favour of an otherwise unacceptable proposal. This application should be refused on the grounds of overdevelopment, parking, turning and access. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The second speaker is Joseph Pearson, the agent, and you also have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm from Lewis & Co Planning, and we were instructed by the applicants following the first refusal to review the 2 reasons for refusal, which were parking and water neutrality, as been stated by officers. So yeah, we were instructed to review the 2 reasons for refusal on water neutrality and parking. We provided a water neutrality statement, all the assumptions in that in terms of use and times in the shower and things like that are all based, they're taken directly from government guidance in Part G of building regulations. So all those assumptions are written by the government. And we've demonstrated that the development would be water neutral by providing 2 years worth of metered water statements from the existing dwelling. We've also tried to make sure that any fixtures and fittings are not just efficient but also comfortable. So we've specified what those would be. We included rain showers so that it's not limited to the preferences of the people who live there. So there's a bit of flexibility within the numbers. And naturally going to support our water neutrality statement. In terms of parking, for a dwelling of this size, the parking standards require 1.7 spaces, or 2 spaces on a site like this. And we're providing 3 spaces, not including the integral garage. So there's plenty of provision in terms of the parking standards. And the development doesn't result in the loss of any existing spaces. So it would be neutral in that regard. It really is a case of making sure there's a sufficient parking for the new dwelling, both for residents and any visitors. And some of the public comments mentioned overlooking, just to draw your attention to the first floor plan, which shows that any windows in the front of the property only relate to bathrooms and the landing. And there's a condition 9 suggested by your officers for obscure glazing so that overlooking doesn't occur in those windows. And just finally, on the driveway is over 3 meters wide to provide access, so more than wide enough for any necessary vehicle that's going to pass through there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, our final speaker is the ubiquitous Justin Tyler, who comes for his final appearance of tonight. And speaking on behalf of Southwater Parish Council, you have 5 minutes.
Me again from Southwater Parish Council. The Parish Council objects to this application due to the reasons of overdevelopment, being out of character with the adjacent properties, reference SMP 16, and the Blake's Farm development generally speaking, and due to the concerns over the adequacy of parking arrangements being contrary to Neighbourhood Plan Policy SMP 14. Having visited the site and observed it in person, the Council has substantial concerns over the adequacy of parking provisions and over the impact and effect on the parking arrangements for the adjacent neighbours. One of the main reasons for the inclusion of policy SMP 14 is to address issues around on-road parking, and encouraging on-road parking would conflict with the aspirations of the policy and contribute to antisocial parking behaviours. This would be contrary to policy 33 of the HDPF, which states that development should incorporate measures to reduce antisocial behaviour in the surrounding area. Access to the proposed property in the application is also fraught with issues, with limited clearance to get past the existing property and garage in situ. Also highlighting the legal implications where their proposed access is obtained going over private land, also at detriment to the adjacent properties. DC 21-1101 was previously refused for good reason, and simply removing the partition between bedrooms 2 and 3 does not rectify the issue this application presents. A 2-bed dwelling built to the size and scale of a 3 or 4-bed dwelling, simply to circumvent parking requirements, is not acceptable. The Parish Council cannot support a planning application that demonstrates a strong example of overdevelopment, unrealistic and impractical access, impact to the neighbouring properties and the impact to their amenity, and if this conflicts with the neighbourhood plan approved by the residents of Southwater. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would officers like to make any comments at this stage?
Thank you. In terms of overdevelopment and out of character with the area, it should be noted that the previous scheme wasn't refused on those grounds, so that would be then contrary to what was already been decided as part of the application. We understand that it is unusual in terms of its parking and the access, but we have highways are not objected, and we have and the officer has been on site and checked all the measurements, and there are similar circumstances where this approach has been taken, and we feel that we can't refuse it on those grounds. In terms of accessing over private land, that wouldn't necessarily, that would be a planning matter. It'd be something that if that was the case, then it would be down to the applicant to get those agreements in place before this house was constructed. But that's not a planning matter. And the final comment on the 2-bedroom. This has been put forward as a 2-bedroom house, and it would have to be built in accordance with those approved plans. We wouldn't be able to control the future change of that, but in terms of planning and enforcement, it would have to be built in accordance with those plans, which do show a 2-bedroom dwelling. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll now go to the local member, which is Councillor Vickers.
You must be fed up with hearing from me this evening, Chairman. Sorry. Thank you to the officers for their report. I went out on site yesterday with the planning officer that was dealing with the application, specifically to look at the parking and the access. I have real serious concerns that the parking is going to be adequate. The access, excuse me, the access also requires the car to manoeuvre over privately owned land, but it's not clear from this plan that you see before you. So I'm suggesting that we refuse this application on the basis there is insufficient parking and the access is not acceptable. Thank you.
Would officers like to respond to any of that?
More than welcome. You can take that view, and that's the councillor's prerogative. But the evidence that we've got from the highways and from our own assessment is that this is appropriate. But understand that you want to go down that route to refuse it.
Thank you. Do I have Councillor Stanhope next?
I'm happy to second that. I think this is someone trying to make a bit of money, and it's squeezing something, and there are problems, as we've heard. And I think what the parish said and what my friend next to me said is reasonable, so I would like to second that motion.
Okay, I'll come to that motion after I've heard other speakers. Councillor Karen Burgess.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you set a dangerous precedent if you start to go over private land. It looks like a slalom, which I don't think would be very safe for anybody or not very nice. So I would certainly not want my car in the way of someone doing that. And I would agree that this should be refused.
Thank you. Councillor Minto.
It's just something I wanted to check with the officer there. You said that there were some reasons mentioned that didn't get mentioned or were part of the refusal in the previous one. Does that mean that we need to be more meticulous in refusing and list all of the things we're refusing for? Because it doesn't allow us to then retrospectively refuse on something that has been passed before.
Decisions can be made in two ways. Around 95% of decisions are made under delegated powers. About 5% of those most controversial that kind of tick the boxes in the constitution come to full planning committee. So the previous application was determined under delegated powers. This one's obviously being elevated to committee. There is a need for both officers and members to have a consistency on our decision making. So whilst officers made that decision, it is the decision of the council. It's not an individual's decision, and that's a material consideration in your assessment. So I hope that helps. Thank you.
Sorry, can I step in at this end as well? I just think it's a general point for the committee that legal ownership of the land is not a material planning consideration. So that's not something that we should be considering.
Thank you. Do I have any other speakers? No. Okay, I'll go back to Councillor Vickers for her alternative motion to refuse, if you could spell it out.
Chairman, I'm not happy, I'd like this refused on the basis of inadequate parking and unacceptable access.
Councillor Vickers, can I just query that? Obviously, the level of parking is in accordance with the council's parking standards. So I think it would be difficult for the council to refuse it in terms of the level of parking. I could understand the concerns about the access. Obviously, we've got tracking plans that demonstrate it, but I can understand that. But I'm just a bit concerned about refusing on the level of parking.
Overdevelopment then, well, that was the previous application, wasn't using that as a reason for refusal.
I think it's access that we.
The access is my main concern. I think also the proximity, they have to drive literally right past the front door, the porch, to get through. And a 2-bedroom house requires a lesser number of parking spaces than a 3-bedroom house. And the previous one was exactly the same footprint for a 3-bedroom house.
I think again, obviously we didn't have a reason for refusal on amenity in the previous application, so we need to be mindful of that. Obviously, my understanding is it's the access which leads to the parking area, which does appear to be the main concern of members, and the ability therefore to use that area of parking rather than the number of spaces itself.
Also the harm factor, I think. I mean, if somebody opens their front door and a small child runs out as somebody's driving past, though, says it all, really.
So we summarise this as difficulties of access, both the.
Could I just ask for some clarification before we move on to voting? Because I didn't quite understand the tracking diagram that we've got there. It's not clear from that why a vehicle would not approach in a straight line from slightly above the position where that vehicle is currently shown, adjacent to the top of the red line, and go in a straight line, and therefore not have to turn and not swing into the front door. So I didn't really understand what was going on there, and it would just be good to have that clarified.
As you can see there, if it was to go straight over, you'd be going over somebody else's garden and grassed area. So I think they're trying to limit that impact in terms of the loss of them. Yeah.
So the third party land people are concerned about is not shown as being covered by that tracking arrangement. The tracking arrangement was to avoid the third party land. Okay, I didn't understand that. Yes, whereas the tracking arrangement where you avoid the third party land looks very unsatisfactory. If you go straight, I think the case is much less good, but
Okay, I think we've got enough clarification on that. So can we just read out the motion, the alternative motion to refuse? Hang on a second. Okay, we're just going to read out. We're going to read out the motion as a.
So if I may, the motion I've got is to refuse the application on the basis that the access is not appropriate in accordance with policy and in conflict with and in poor design in accordance with policy 40. Is that right?
Okay, seconded by Councillor Stannard. So we'll take that.
Sorry, can I just ask a point of clarity? Where does
Is there not a requirement to safety, as is pointed out, that the cars are going to go so close to either the cars that are there in front of the garage or close to the porch? I mean, have we got a policy regarding safety that we can use?
I mean, I think inadequate access covers that as well, but we'll just see if there's a specific policy here.
I appreciate the motion put forward is generally on the basis of the access, and I think we've bottomed that out. In terms of the safety, that would come under more of a amenity element, and that's policy 33. You know, it's obviously it wasn't a point raised last time, so members need to be mindful of that. But clearly, we refused the access arrangements at that time as well. If members considered it reasonable and necessary, then it's open to members to add concerns about safety to any reason for refusal, which comes under policy 33 in my view.
I'd be happy to do that, Chairman.
Okay, if we can add that to the motion.
I'll read that. Shall I read that back out?
Yes, please, yes.
Okay, so what I've got is that the application is refused on the basis that the access is not appropriate and poorly designed, in conflict with policy 40, and also due to safety issues relating to the poor design, in conflict with policy 33.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move to the vote on that. So we're voting to refuse for the grounds just listed. So all those in favour of refusal, please raise your hands.
That's 12.
Yeah. All those against? And any abstentions?
Yes, one abstention. So the motion's carried.
Thank you very much. Right, so that concludes the last substantive item. All we have besides that is urgent business, item 9. There isn't any urgent business, so thank God. So thank you very much, everyone. That is the last Planning North of this